I'm joined here by Thomas Richards Jr., who wrote The Unfinished Business of 1776. And I see a lot of parallels between your work and what I've done with We the Women. And I would love to talk to you about the sort of theme of your book. And we couldn't be talking at a better time, the 250th. So, can you talk a little bit about why you decided to write The Unfinished Business of 1776 and kind of the argument that I think you make very well again and again throughout the book?
Sure. And first, thanks for having me on.
Of course.
The book comes from a frustration I had with kind of two different narratives of the American Revolution. The one comes from the right, that the founding fathers were perfect and they did nothing wrong, and anything that's wrong with this country is our fault or someone later. And then the other one kind of comes from the far left, which is really that there's nothing there for us, that really this is a bunch of rich, elite, slave-holding men, white men, and the revolution has no, it is basically we should discard it and forget about it, and it's the root of all our problems. And I thought that there is a sort of middle ground, or maybe left of center ground, where the revolution at the time was pretty radical. And I think what's really important is that there were many other Americans, not the founding fathers, who believed in the revolution, and it didn't kind of come true for them in a way that they hoped, but they kept fighting. And so the book is really about different groups of people grasping to the ideals of the revolution to make their voices heard over the next 100 years.
It's a beautiful sentiment. I think when I was working on We the Women, a book I wrote with Nora O'Donnell, there is some overlap there in our book, in your book, in terms of the women who worked behind the scenes. And you talk a bit about this incredible woman named Deborah Sampson, who actually dressed as a soldier in order to fight in the Revolutionary War. And I know that you uncover a lot of these stories about women who worked behind the scenes and believed as much in the founders' promises, like Mercy Otis Warren and other women at the time. I think that one of the things that's the most surprising in your book is New Jersey, and the fact there was a period of time when women could actually vote, right? And that to your point, there were rights given and then rights taken away. And can you talk a little bit about that loophole in New Jersey and how women were? It's important to know that it wasn't married women, because once you got married, you lost all your rights, right? With coverture, which is astounding. But can you talk a little bit about what happened in New Jersey and the kind of message that you think that gives us for how rights are slowly taken and then taken away?
Sure. New Jersey is a fascinating story about women's suffrage. At a time when women are basically not able to vote almost anywhere in the world. The New Jersey Constitution, it gives the right to vote to people with property. And it says people or people with property of 50 pounds. This is the case in some other state constitutions as well. But for whatever reason, in New Jersey, certain women say, I'm a person too, and they go to the polls. And they start voting. And we have records in 1787. We have a couple of women voting in South Jersey. And then over the course of the next 10 years, more and more women start going to the polls. And when you go into poll lists, maybe 10% of certain elections had women voting, which is incredible when you think about, as you said, married women could not vote. They lose their property because it becomes their husband's. And so therefore, this is all unmarried women, widowed women, unmarried women. And so this is just an incredible story. And what's really kind of doubly incredible is the New Jersey legislature probably did this by accident. They didn't really mean for women to vote. But by the 1790s, they are accepting that this is something that has happened. And they changed the Constitution to say he or she, accepting that women are voting. And then it starts in South Jersey. It takes over all of Jersey. It's kind of spreads into North Jersey. And then women are voting consistently until 1807. There is some pushback. The pushback grows louder. And then in 1807, there is an incredibly corrupt election. and that for reasons that have nothing to do with women voting, but the New Jersey legislature basically says this is how we kind of fix our the problem of women voting is what they're thinking about. And so they get rid of, they drop the property requirement. So all men can vote, but they add a racial and gender barrier. So women are no longer allowed to vote and Black men are no longer allowed to vote. So this is a common story of the kind of post-revolutionary times where suffrage is expanded for white men and then it contracts for other people. And there is this kind of counter-revolutionary story that every revolution has pushback. And this is a depressing but very real example.
How many Black men were voting at the time in New Jersey? Was that a significant number too? I mean, were there Black men voting at the time as well as unmarried women with property?
The Museum of the American Revolution has done a lot of research on this, so I want to cite them a little bit here. That they have discovered certain Black men voting. It's not in a lot of numbers. Part of this is that there was just a very small Black population in New Jersey, so that's one of the issues. And then the other issue is if a person was enslaved, as still most Black people in New Jersey were, then they obviously did not own property and could not vote. But we do have records that certain Black men were voting. But this is a great example where as the legislature see it, the problem is bigger than the problem, right, in quotes, is the bigger than the actual reality. This is not like, certainly not a lot of Black men were voting, and still women 5-10% of certain elections, but this is not right. And so this is a great example where they're kind of creating, again, problem in their ideas. They're kind of creating it in their minds.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of it is about white men wanting to hold on to the power they have too, right? It's they see it slowly seeping away. And when you look at redistricting now, and you look at the kind of through line through history, do you see that? And I think that your book is hopeful. And I think you're talking about how this evolution in America constantly, it feels a lot like 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, kind of constant. But you see that as a positive part of America's story. Do you see, when you look at redistricting and what's happening now in terms of making sure that people of color don't vote in some districts and kind of the clawing back, thinking of Roe versus Wade being overturned too, do you look at this as just a kind of a blip that we will go through and it's part of the growing pains of this country, that your book is making the point, hey, this has happened before, it will continue to happen as we evolve? And what's your take on what's happening now in terms of basic rights that, at least in my lifetime, I expected that people of color would get to vote easily, women would have access to healthcare, and these things are changing a lot now. So I'm curious what your thought is about the moment that we're in now.
So I kind of have 2 thoughts as me as an American living in this moment, and then me as a historian. I think from me as an American in this moment, this is an incredibly disturbing trend. This is something that, I think I thought when I was I'm in my 40s now, in my 20s and 30s, we just keep expanding the rights, and there would be more and more democracy, and we would get to a point that the republic keeps on getting better. And that's kind of me as my personal hope and feeling. As a historian, kind of a little bit more dispassionately, although still in some ways passionately, this is, as you said, a long story of American history that I don't know if I'd say 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, but maybe 5 steps forward, 4 steps back, that there is a constant battle between who can have rights, or who deserves to have rights, who can gain those rights, how are these rights implemented in the actual political system. I think as I consider the steps back we are making, I do think it's important to recognize that we are not in 1807. And I think that's where there's certain hope, right? There has been positive changes, and those positive changes, they are still around us, and they're trying to be rolled back slowly but surely. But I don't think we can say that there hasn't been, even in the last 10 or 15 years, or really as kind of since the Trump administration kind of has taken power. I don't think we can say that there has been some sort of, not everything is gone, and that's kind of the hope.
Yeah. We're not at Handmaid's Tale level right now, right? It's
and I know that sounds that's a very low bar. So I mean, but I think there should be a recognition that we can fight back and retake some of these rights and continue to expand the story, expand rights. The story doesn't end. History doesn't end. There's going to be no moment where we say we did it, it's all great, and there's going to be no moment where we should say, it's all over, everything is a catastrophe. The story continues.
I love that approach to it, and that it's beautiful in many ways, right? One of the quotes that I love most, and I jotted it down here on a Post-it note because I always look at it when I'm writing about history, is from James Baldwin. And he says, American history is longer, larger, more various, more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it, right? It is, and which makes me think about your work. When you were digging into the revolution, was there something something that really surprised you, something you uncovered that you didn't know before? I'm sure there were a lot of things, but is there something that you would want people to know about the book, that's something that's kind of stopped you in your tracks as you were doing your research?
Sure. I mean, beyond, I think one of the most interesting is women voting in New Jersey. But the second thing, I think that I was surprised. There were certain things I started to research that I knew kind of where I was going with it. I wanted to research the story of economic equality or inequality and what the founding fathers thought about this, and what was kind of the values during the revolution. Because I think we think there's the Tea Party has put us this idea in our head where it was all about low taxes, small government. Well, when you actually look at the records, the founding fathers and most Americans were incredibly disturbed by economic inequality. When they looked at how is a republic healthy, there is general economic equality and economic opportunity for everyone. And what they believed is, if someone gets too much wealth, they can use their wealth to undermine the kind of democracy from within, buy people off, and take too much power, which in some ways should all sound kind of familiar, right? As we're talking. And so I discovered this really fascinating story of, after the first economic depression in the United States in 1819, there was this huge movement that it was titled Relief, capital R, Relief, that Americans who were struggling would get help from the government. Their debts could be repaid. They can have longer years to repay their debts. They would not be put in prison for being in debt, which was a common thing 30 or 40 years before. And this relief movement really took over a lot of states, a lot of Western states in particular. It ends up getting, just like so many things, rolled back. There are some gains. Debtor's prison is abolished. But as the Great Depression ends, again, small g Great Depression, there is kind of a movement by the people in power to get rid of the relief program. What's really interesting, and there was an amateur historian who wrote about this, what happened in the state of Kentucky. He wrote about it in the 1930s, and he was writing about Kentucky in the 1820s, and he called it Kentucky's New Deal of the 1820s. So it's, this is this idea that not all kind of economic quality redistribution ideas are modern. They also come from the founding.
I had no idea that there was kind of a welfare system in place back then. I mean, it seems as though that's kind of what it was, right? There was a social kind of safety net for people that no longer, that I feel like our country has kind of said is not the way forward. We're a very capitalist forward country, obviously. Is there anything else in your book, particularly about, I think that one of the fascinating things is that when competing groups are trying to fight for the same thing, especially when you look at Seneca Falls and Sojourner Truth not being invited, and this kind of fight between women's rights activists and Black civil rights activists. Do you see that there was, when you look now today and you look back at that time, do you think that there's an understanding being taught in American schools? My answer to this is no. That this is complicated. That this was a time of people looking for compromise, but then, there was a pushback, and obviously enslavement is our greatest sin in this country, and the way that Black people were treated certainly is. But that women at the time felt as though if they worked with Black Americans, that their rights, that they kind of had to go in sequence. And while I think it's horrific to look at that now and the way that Susan B. Anthony and other women that we know from that era, from the 1840s, didn't want Black women to get the vote when white women did, because they thought it wasn't going to happen. But I guess what I'm saying is there's such complexity to this time, and sometimes we don't accept that people were messy. And I think that that's one thing that you look back on, the George Washington owning slaves and Thomas Jefferson. Do you think that people have perspective in American schools, and I know you're a historian and a teacher now, where there's putting yourself in this moment, the deals and the compromises that had to be worked out, and not necessarily, I think that now it's like, this kind of judgment that we throw on people without really fully understanding the moment that they were living in. And then again, with some people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, they seem to be immune from it. So I'm curious what your take is. I know that's a long-winded question, but what your take is on that.
I think there's a way. Well, so you hear from particularly the right, the idea that we need to judge the founding fathers or whomever by the standards of their time. And then you kind of hear from, again, this is a caricature, but kind of the left, like, well, Jefferson owned slaves. Let's he has no legacy that
Right.
we should celebrate, right? And I think the answer to this is, if we do judge people by their times, we can judge them actually for owning slaves, because they were judging each other for owning slaves.
Right.
Jefferson famously talked about how slavery was terrible many, many times, and then he didn't really do anything about it. In fact, he had several children with Sally Hemings, the person who was enslaved to him. But there were other founding fathers who did free their slaves or talked about abolition. There were other abolitionists at the time. There were, the American Revolution was when emancipation takes over the North, because both white and Black people basically say, if we're going to have a land that's based on for independence, we can't have slavery. And so the revolution leads to freedom throughout the North. So people are judging people about slavery all the time. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean that what they thought about slavery or about each other in terms of race and racism was contemporary to what we think. And so we can read some things that might seem offensive, even if that person might be pretty strongly anti-slavery. And so there's kind of this gray area. To your point about the suffragists, the early Seneca Falls activists, this is a great example where I think if we are judging them by the standards of their time, we should recognize their racism, but that doesn't mean we need to, that doesn't mean we shouldn't celebrate their legacy at the same time. They were living in a world that was filled with racism, unfortunately. Probably most white Americans in the 1840s were racist to a certain extent, even abolitionists. So that's not an excuse, right? That doesn't mean that these women, that we should not mention that we have to hide that. But the world they're living in, unfortunately, is one that was far more racist than our world. That's a great example where we have taken steps. No matter how much has gone wrong and seems awful in the last couple of years, that world 150 years ago was far more racist than our world today.
It's kind of shocking how recent it was, relatively speaking, right? Um, what I know you're a professor as well. What courses are you teaching, and are you at a university or a high school? I'm curious how you're interfacing with students on this.
I used to teach higher ed, but now I teach at high school. I teach at a private school outside in Philadelphia, Springside, Chestnut Hill. I really like working with high school students, partially because they ask these questions about messiness, and
Yeah,
I'm not on any sort of pedestal. They're willing to venture all sorts of opinions.
yeah,
And actually, I think when I think about why is there some hope in this book, where I think was
yeah.
written at a time of I see young people, they can handle complexity. I think there's this idea like
Mhm.
that if we have to teach a certain narrative, whether that's patriotic American, teach the Bible, all this stuff like
Yeah,
in the right, or kind of the reverse, that we have to teach a certain narrative, and students, high schoolers will be unable to, they
yeah.
can't deal with messiness and complexity. They deal with messiness and complexity all the time.
Yeah.
And I actually think one of the things that gives me hope is that when I think we had this idea we're going to teach patriotic history in certain red states, high school students tend to know better, and they tend to not listen to what their teachers tell them. So the idea that they're going to suddenly just take this in, and then we're all
Yeah.
going to just kind of move rightward as we don't teach the complicated, messy parts, they know otherwise.
Hmm.
You
Oh,
know,
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear you say that, because it's such a different, I mean, I grew up in the 80s. It sounds like we're of a similar age. And it just feels like now there is this indoctrination. Not, I live in Maryland, so it's certainly not happening here, but in some states in America, they're kind of whitewashing a lot of history, and that is really scary. So you think that kids are prepared for that, at least where you are in the Northeast. But if you're in a family in the South and you're not hearing about the other side of the story, that's where the danger comes in, right? It seems like there's a lot of ignorance about the country, even redlining. I mean, I live in a neighborhood in Bethesda, Maryland, and it was redlined. And so, Black people weren't able to own homes here. And that kind of the economic opportunity wasn't available to them. And I think that people need to learn about that more. And it sounds to me like you're confident that there is an education out there, and we shouldn't be too worried about it.
well, so positive and negative. Positive,
Yeah.
negative, kind of where what I worry is this is where if we don't push back, right? What does this look like in a kind of in a deep red state with
Yeah.
a patriotic history after 10 or 15 years, right? And then as time goes on, suddenly, everyone reads banned books when they first get banned, but then if they
Mhm.
disappear, that means like the actual sales of banned books go up, right? If they
Yeah.
disappear in 20 years, that's a serious problem. So I worry about the long term, and that's kind of why, why we have to push back, and why activists are doing their part to make sure that these things don't happen. I think positively, you mentioned redlining.
Yeah.
Redlining, redlining was never taught to me. I graduated in 2001. It was never taught to me at kind of a suburban Philly school, and it was
Hmm.
not in any textbook. So it's in all
Wow.
the textbooks now, right? In a quarter cent, I teach it to my students. My students know about it usually before they hear about it. So so it's out there. There have been gains made. This is common knowledge, far more common knowledge now than it was a quarter century ago. So in that sense, progress has been made in terms of how historians and teachers are trying to kind of get the word out there.
Yeah, in my actually, now that you mention it, I went to public school, and I wasn't taught about redlining either. In fact, my history teacher didn't teach us about World War One, because they said it's a lot like World War Two, and we just don't have time. And it's like, oh my God, so different. So there is like I think that the American education system, and I'm talking about the public school. Our kids go to public school. I just think I'm a little concerned about how much kids are reading and how much they know, which brings me to why I think your book is so important. Are you doing a young readers edition of your book?
I'm not at this point, but it would be
Okay.
something I should consider and look into. Uh,
Yeah. And what are you, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, but what are you reading now?
what am I reading now? I am reading right now. I am reading a book about very old Patrick Wyman, I believe his name is the author. It's about kind of how civilizations first start, kind of about like in some ways the positive and negatives of human beings early in civilization. But the book, you did put me on the spot a little bit. I had to think about
Sorry,
what
sorry.
um, the book I'm going to read next is called, I'm forgetting the author's name, The Digital Delusion, which in terms of teaching, this is where do I worry? I don't worry that students can't deal with complicated ideas. And I do think we need to teach kind of all the messiness, and that includes the good and the bad. And I think they can deal with that. What I worry about kind of moving forward with young people is the idea, the social media, cell
Yeah.
phones, AI, and this idea that really you can find a space where you don't ever have to hear any different ideas ever, and you can just hear people and agree with them and say anybody who disagrees with me is just wrong and bad. And that is something. And so this book, The Digital Delusion, so hopefully maybe someone in the chat can look up the author. It's all about how, kids on screens this is something that I am kind of interested in and worried about moving forward.
And are you worried about people using AI to write their essays? And are you noticing a lack of critical thinking among high schoolers, especially? Because, I mean, I have a 12-year-old daughter and she'll ask Alexa for, math answers. Love her to death. She's amazing. But, you have this easy way of getting information now. Why go through the labor intensive work of actually doing it yourself? I'm wondering what you're seeing in school.
It's a great question. There is a, just like so many things in America today, there is kind of a divide, and I think the divide is getting bigger. And so students who are really, and I'm coming here from a history perspective.
Yeah.
But students who are really interested in history, they're going to do the work, or they just want to learn. Maybe they're not that interested in history, but they value learning and they like the process. They like that friction in their brain that kind of pushes them farther. But then there's students who are maybe history is not their favorite thing, right? Maybe they're great at something else and it's not history. AI is the easy route out of that. And so they don't get that friction in the brain that leads to more learning. And what I've noticed is a greater divide of where I think the students who are near the top are doing just fine. But I think AI is really going to hurt when we think about kind of opportunities down the road and what AI is going to do. I think it's going to further this division, not necessarily red blue, but this kind of class inequality division that we have in this country, where the people who excel at school will continue to excel, but AI is kind of come and wash through those people who just need they just need a little extra help, right? They can do it, but AI is gonna step in before that and lead them down roads that they will not be good for them, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed reading The Unfinished Business of 1776. I think it's a great book and also a hopeful book, because from the title you can take it either way, which I love. But we are a work in progress, right? And that seems to be the message. And I like your, what was it? 5 steps forward, 4 steps back.
4 steps back, 10, 9. You can pick one less than the forward, I think is.
Yeah. I like that. Well, thank you, Thomas. It's a pleasure talking to you. And I'll be posting this conversation later. And thank you to anyone who joined us today on this Substack journey that I just started. And it's an honor to talk to you because your book is fascinating. It's really interesting. I read the chapter on Seneca Falls and one fell swoop. I was just fascinated in the New Jersey section. Where you're talking about, I think most people don't realize that there was a brief time when women could vote. And that's an amazing thing to have uncovered. So thank you very much, Thomas.
Thanks so much for having me, Kate. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Thanks.